Afternoon all. I'd like to go over with you a fantastic Sicilian Defense game of Garry Kasparov, one of the legends of chess. He was against one of Britain's finest ever players, Michael Adams. And this was in the Linares tournament of 2005. Linares is a Spanish city which lies in the Andalusia on the crossing of railways to Madrid in the north, Granada in the south, and Sevilla in the west. Metal mining was its main activity, and Linares had an unsurpassing quality. Industry was its main activity, and it led a dull existence, but it changed when a series of tournaments in 1978 started, the Linares series. Linares to Kasparov is like Tilburg to Karpov, both such famous tournaments. They even had chess fonts created after them. The reputation of Kasparov in Linares is particularly evident. He won several of these, and some with great drama. So when it first started, it was actually won by a relatively unknown player in 1978, a Swede, Jan Elslund. So he won on tiebreak against an Argentinian player, Roberto Debano. So it was held every other year until 1987, when that year no tournament took place because Linares was hosting the candidates final to determine a challenger for Kasparov's world title. So that was postponed until 1988, and the tournament again became an annual event with the exception of 1996. The 1994 tournament had an ELO average of 2685, incredible standard for that period of time, especially the highest ever at the time, making it the first category 18 event ever held. The field at that time included Karpov, Kasparov, Shirov, Baryev, Kramnik, Lortier, Anand, Kamsky, Topalov, Inchuk, Gelfand, Iskalas, Judith Polgar, and Belyavsky. The 1994 tournament was also noted for an incident. Kasparov did the take-back against Judith Polgar. So this was all in the colourful history of Linares, but it's an amazing tournament for Kasparov, and one which was his last professional tournament, and this is one of his last professional, very special, very, very interesting games, playing black. So it's like the Wimbledon of chess. Wimbledon is one of my favourite tennis tournaments, and for chess players this became one of the most sort of viewed tournaments of the year. Very, very special, very, very strong. So in the 2005 tournament, Michael Adams kicked off with e4, and Kasparov stuck with his Sicilian Defense. A lot of his opening repertoire is modelled on Bobby Fischer. For example, Kasparov was also fond of the Sicilian Defense, so he had obviously studied Fischer in great detail and was impressed, and emulated at least Fischer's openings to some extent. And obviously that was helped by technology advances like ChessBase coming along, but sharp Sicilian territory was definitely a shared aspect of their opening repertoires. So Michael Adams played knight f3 and was intending for now a mainline Sicilian defence. After d6 we see d4, so an open Sicilian. Kasparov chooses knight f6, and now the standard waiting move a6. And here after bishop e3 we don't see e5, we see instead a Scheveningen structure. Kasparov plays e6. This keeps things very flexible in the centre. Will d5 or e5 be useful later on in the game? What setup should Michael Adams play? The English attack system is borrowing some stuff from ideas from, say, the Dragon, where you play like this f3 against knight g4s, and although there's no bishop to swap off, this is still quite dangerous. White can carry on with g4, g5, etc. But here, curiously, Michael Adams is perhaps, you could argue, this is a little bit of a time-consuming move, bishop e2, if White's intention is queen d2 and f3 later. Okay, black plays queen c7, And indeed we do see queen d2, and now it becomes quite evident after this next move b5 that the standard plan of black is really going to exert an unpleasant influence over the e4 pawn. And another aspect to consider here is if this bishop really is, for example, going to go to f3, then what about a maneuver like this to c4 might be more effective. So it's as though Michael is a little bit concerned maybe about b4, and okay, he has some options, it would seem, revolving around protecting e4, but his first choice is actually to play a3. So the question here is, are these systems being a little bit mixed up? After bishop b7, he doesn't choose bishop f3 but chooses f3. There must be a little bit of nerves playing against Kasparov with his huge reputation and his great presence at the board, and it looks as though some systems, maybe out of panic or fear, have been mixed up slightly. What is this bishop doing on e2? Because, for example, if the bishop was on f1, then maybe g4 later the queen could go to h2 quicker, for example. What is this pawn doing on a3? Maybe if it's left on a2, that's not so bad for b4, because maybe sometimes knight a4 and then b6 is an issue. But we have these this mixture, this strange mixture, you could argue, that it's like an English attack system delayed from white's perspective by the moves a3 and bishop e2. But is this enough to exploit in some subtle way? Maybe there are some advantages of the bishop on e2 here, hidden in the position. Okay, Kasparov's next move, he doesn't routinely try for castling, he doesn't play bishop e7, he doesn't try knight bd7. For example, this might be a tempting plan, you'd think. Instead, actually, we see knight c6 exerting some pressure on d4, but also it means that b4 is slightly more effective, because AB knight takes b4 is not a bad place for a knight, especially if white's king is on c1. Okay, now a question arises here: why in this particular setup, why would white be interested in castling queenside? Maybe there's an element of confidence in some respect of being able to sort of structurally exploit black's structure if b4 was played, if white castles queenside. But maybe, castles we need to look at in the second pass on the kingside. Michael played castling queenside, so it's like he's openly inviting a seemingly dangerous move. Maybe there's some structural justification that if white can weather the attack here, then maybe, for example, a6 or b5 is going to be weak later. So maybe he wasn't too frightened for b4. So an element of bravery, but also there seems to be an element of mixing some systems here. So after knight takes b4, this knight seems unusually aggressive in relation to white's king here. It seems an accelerated attacking setup for black in some respects. Okay, but Michael plays now g4, so this plan is carried on, and it does seem aggressive. Should black still be trying to castle kingside? Isn't he going into a pawn avalanche on the kingside? Should Kasparov be worried? Maybe things like queen a5, they don't seem to quite work here. For example, knight b3, and then where would it lead to? The knight's protecting a1. So it's not obvious how black can continue the attack. A move like rook c8 would also seem potentially tempting. But, okay, I think Kasparov realises he really needs to try and use all his resources here for a successful attack. So bishop e7 it is. He's trying to get this rook into the play to help maybe on the queen side. There's two semi-open foals here for black to make use of, potentially. So we see g5 for Michael Adams, kicking the knight back, and now h4. Is white's attack a little bit slow, or is it going to be accelerated anyway? As soon as black castles, you can imagine g6 having to be calculated at every turn, because h5 will then try and peel open the h-file. But one symptom of this mixture is that this bishop is inhibiting the queen from h2, which might be a useful square. for such an h-file attack, as well as keeping an eye on this diagonal on d6 sometimes. Okay, Kasparov plays here knight c5, and it looks as though there's some dangerous forcing moves lurking around. Queen a5 is a little bit more effective than before, surely. For example, knight b3, we can take that off now, so that's pretty dangerous. And you might think, well, king b1, but then again, you know, something like knight a4 might be dangerous. Okay, so this next move seems to be a little bit of prophylaxis by white, king b1. So queen a5 seems less effectual without too many immediate threats. Now, there's this option of castling or playing on the queenside here. For the moment, we see rook b8. So the rook is eyeing that king on the b file. It looks a little bit dangerous for white's king, but black's king hasn't even castled yet. We see h5 as though daring black. Do you really want to castle? Haven't I got a ready-made attack here with, say, g6? Okay. Well, actually, there's a slight downside to what happens next. Black does castle. It seems a little bit brave to do this, and g6 is indeed played, trying to open up the lines. But one slight weakness of the last move of playing g6, although it attempts to open lines, it's created its own bias of the position here, which is important. That this particular bishop, this e7 bishop, which is often quite dangerous if it can be liberated, can actually use the f6 square here. So this diagonal could actually be very useful to black, and it is actually put there here straight away, bishop f6. So it's exerting forcing move influence already. The option to take on d4 might be useful, and there's other options which are emerging here which may be useful. Even potentially d5, because that's supported by the knight and bishop here, and the bishop's covering the dark squares. So this d5 and e5 always needs to be factored in as well, but particularly d5 might be of relevance to black. Michael Adams plays rook d to g1. So is his attack going to be quick enough here? Well, we see this casual retreat move now, bishop a8, which indicates a stronger connection of the rook to white's king here is emerging. And this is a position which maybe is starting to look like any Sicilian defense player's dream. There's a lot of dynamic, aggressive play here on both the b and c files, and black's knights are looking particularly aggressive, with aggressive intent. The rook seems to be having a good time. Both bishops are having a good time in this position. It's just this small matter of these rooks facing the black king as well. But okay, and a line opening on the g file. This next move by Michael Adams seems actually quite venomous. Bishop g5 is played, trying to get rid of this particular sting on this diagonal. And for a moment, actually, this is refused, this trade. Bishop e5 is played, and white dare not perhaps play f4 without weakening e4 here. It starts to be dangerous for, say, knight takes e4 or a bishop d4 first. It seems there's a dangerous pressure lurking on e4 here. So is white wanting to play f4? That's something we need to check in the second pass. Michael has played g takes h7, which seems fair enough, open up the g file, but his own bishop's in the way actually of the rook connecting with black's king easily on g7. So some forcing moves for black's king are delayed here at the moment. There's no easy lineup, it would seem. So here Michael plays knight b3. So what is the point of knight b3? In one respect, if knight takes b3, the double pawns look a bit ugly, but on the other hand, can white aim to maybe even get a bind on d5 with bishop c4 next? Can that position be a bit safer? Maybe rook c1, trying to make use of that c file as well as black. So this invitation for knight takes b3 looks tempting because it's wrecking white's pawn structure, but in fact Kasparov finds something much more interesting. Can you spot what he plays in this position if I give you 10 seconds starting from now? Okay. He plays, maybe playing on a slight weakness of the last move, forcing moves to exploit it. He plays knight takes c2. So clearly b3 is undermined here. So taking on c2, we can take on b3. But Adams can surely take with knight takes c5 here and then delay taking a knight. Unfortunately, okay, in this position, what does Kasparov play here? If I give you 10 seconds. Okay, he plays knight a3 check. Maybe Michael Adams is a little bit cynical of this sequence, otherwise he wouldn't have invited it. Maybe cynical because he still thinks maybe he's picking up some material here. Intuitively, one would think this is playing with fire because the king doesn't really want to meet the force of queen, bishop, queen and rook here. He plays king a2. Okay. And it looks as though potentially that this knight might be gobbled up if black is not too careful. For the moment it seems it has immunity after queen takes c5. If this knight is dead to be taken, then c3 is dropping off. But this next forcing move by white, does it offer black a problem? White plays knight a4. Is this knight really going to be gobbled up in this position? Well, I think Kasparov has seen all this and he plays a remarkably powerful move in this position. He doesn't want his knight gobbled up for nothing. There's also queen c6. Is white really going to play a move like king takes a3? That would be exceptionally cheeky with the knight holding up b2 for the king to be carnivorous there. That would be the ultimate in cheek, surely. But Kasparov has something lined up in this position. A fantastically effective resource. So if I give you 10 seconds, can you spot it? Starting from now. Okay. He plays knight c2. The queen is immune here to capture, because they will follow rook takes b2, mating in this position. That would be mate. The rook, knight and bishop are mating that there. So that cannot be taken. Whoops. Is white under real trouble here? Under real fire? King b1 is played. We'll check in the second pass for alternative defences. And here, the finishing move. Can you spot it? I hope you do, and this is Kasparov's actually last win in his professional career in his favourite tournament, arguably his favourite tournament series, the Wimbledon of chess. So I hope you can spot this final move if I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Kasparov plays queen a3, setting up numerous killer threats. Most notably, it would seem rook takes b2 and splat for the white king. But let's check this now with engine view, this final position. Is it so hopeless for white? Queen c2 initially, you saw that initial valuation as though it was initially okay. There's a problem here. White in this position is a piece up, but this B and C files are very dangerous. Let's look at this move, rook fc8. Where does the queen go? It needs to hold on to a4 surely as part of its requirements. If it doesn't hold on to a4, well, it's also got to hold on to b2 as well. So say you know, for example, queen d1 would be a disaster on b2. It's a mate in 2. Can't play that. Mate in 2. Okay, I have to take queen takes b2, mate. Queen d2 and the knight must fall off. What else is there? We can try and interpose a bishop. Does that help? I wouldn't have thought so. Rook takes c4, and we still have a crushing position on b2 emerging. So the queen can't hold on to a4 here. If queen d2, black's most powerful option is queen takes a4 simply. And what is black threatening? Bishop takes b2 or rook takes b2. And this is pretty hopeless. Let's imagine bishop d1. And a crushing move here, following forcing blows, is actually bishop takes e4 check. Have a look at this. Check. And it's all over. White's getting dismantled. His king has been stripped of all protection. It's a really hopeless position. White's attack is a long way off. Hopeless. So this is the final position, maybe completely envisaged here, that White's had it here. This knight a4 wasn't such a great idea. Let's look earlier in the game. This mix of systems, was it really an advantage to black after just simply the mix of systems here? The bishop e2, maybe just queen d2. Okay, so we see the mix here, a3. Black's already close to equalizing in this position. It seems good enough for good counterplay. We see f3. Black's very close to equal here at move 10. Now knight c6 was favoured over knight bd7. That's interesting. Could White have castled kingside? That's one question here. Does it fit in at all? Would it have been at all safer? I think it's about equal, this position. Maybe black can just take bishop e7. There's no real problem for black. But the white king seems a little bit safer, to be honest. But that wasn't what happened in the game. White castled queenside, braving the elements after b4. From a technical engine point of view, the engine actually likes this a little bit for white here. Even though the difficulty to play the position is increased, surely, with the white king there on c1 seemed like a natural target. We see the move g4 here. Okay, bishop e7. g5, the knight goes back to d7. Where else? King b1 seems prompted here by the engine, but h4 is also mentioned with an advantage to white. So did white really slip up? This at move 15. We see knight c5. King b1 is prompted by the engine, and that was actually played. Rook b8. h5 looks a bit dangerous for black, potentially. And the engine here is actually suggesting d5, not castling, as the top move at this step. Well, they're about the same now, castling or d5. I assume that this was actually the more logical break for black to aim for if there is a break in the centre with this Scheveningen pawn structure. Okay, but castles, and we see the dangerous move g6, which is prompted as an advantage for white at this certain depth. g6. Bishop f6, one of the only moves, or d5? d5 here might run into a little bit of trouble, surely. But bishop f6 was chosen, which at this step, you know, d5 was the engine choice. So did white miss something technical here? White played rook dg1. Is that really a first inaccuracy? That seems to be still an advantage for white. Again, d5 wasn't played by Kasparov, which appears to be the engine choice. The threat of d5, if we just put that in for a moment, is just smashing white's centre, and say white takes, e5, pawn sack here, gives white an attack surely. White can look forward to an attack, so rook h4, just to double rooks quite quickly, I guess. So I'll be threatening actually different things. It's also against this knight on b4, this is quite a technical move. But let's go back, d5 just wasn't chosen. We saw just bishop a8. So did white really miss an opportunity? Adam's move bishop g5 is called into question here. Actually the evaluation shift is huge on that technically. So what if he had just done what's suggested here, just open up this g line immediately. Let's go with king takes h7. What could white have done here? It does seem a little bit scary for white's king. The need for accuracy definitely has gone up compared with casting kingside surely. So, okay, in this position, it looks like strange artificial moves are being prompted, like rook d1, you wouldn't really consider as a very natural move, or b3 looks as though you don't really want to play that. But let's go with b3, it just doesn't look that convincing. In fact, the engine's totally changed its mind now after rook fc8. Looking at this, that black's doing fantastically well. If white tries to create some sort of fortified position, can this be torn apart? Let's go with queen a5. If white can get away with it, maybe he's got some structural targets to pick on. If he plays h6, then g6 just seals the position. Surely that's a seal, there's no open lines to speak of. That seems fairly hopeless. Let's go with rook g4, just trying to double on g7. Trying to keep the h pawn occupied for hg. Queen a3, what threat does this actually set up? If we look at threat analysis, knight a4 is actually potentially threatened. Intriguing. Why is that such a dangerous threat? Because a2, the simple a2 and a1 will be mating. So knight a4 is a killer threat here, which is difficult to handle. For example, queen e2, knight a4, let's see it. So knight is actually attacked as well. Knight takes a4, check. We can pick up, funny enough, the rook on h1, which is a loose piece here with advantage, if nothing else. This is a very, very dangerous and very difficult to play position for white. Even though the engine might have liked it earlier, surely it started to literally change its tune in this position anyway. So maybe it's not so clear that the error from white was bishop g5 anymore, given that g takes h7 seems pretty hopeless. If you think about it, black's got his two rooks blasting down, his knight's ready. It just looks like an incredibly dangerous position if we just check this out again. And if white didn't play b3, which is inviting a parking spot on a3, what if, okay, let's go with something else. Let's go with doubling on g-file routinely. Okay, what could black play here? King h6, h8 doesn't seem in the spirit of the position here. So we'll give it some more depth. Rook h8 is not the move I want Kasparov to play either, because this attack looks strong here. Couldn't we go all in for an attack? Queen b6 is more like it in the personality of the position. What does it actually threaten, queen b6? If we put that in here. A threat analysis reveals knight d5 is now a threat. That's threatening mate. That's a good way to threaten mate without allowing CD, for example, protecting b2. So knight d5 is the way to do it on b2. So what would white play here against that? Don't tell me b3 is again prompted as the resource, because that just invites previous stuff, doesn't it? Surely. It looks all pretty grim for white in this position. If we imagine white trying to make a run threat, does that help? Probably not. Knight a2 check. And this is no good. Surely not. Whoops. Just taking on b2. So it looks grim, this position, whatever way you cut it. This is more in the personality of the position. Forget the previous poxy ideas of rook h8 or king h8. Just queen b6, line up on b2 to make white on b2. If we're forcing b3 here, we're forcing a chronic weakness, surely. We can now go with queen a5, surely. Again, the engine wants to mess around. It's not the spirit of the position. King h8, king g8, forget that. Why can't we go queen a5? Let's give it a little bit more time. In this position, okay. Queen a5. Why in this position would queen a5 be refuted or defended? Would white play king b2? Is that really the implication here? Let's go with bishop c4 here. Again, rook fc8. Is white really able to handle this pressure? If white tries king b2, there's a knockout blow here. Knight a4 check. If knight takes a4, rook takes c4, this is starting to get to be nasty. Knight c3. Knight c6. Look at this diagonal as well. This is just ripe, this c3 square for this bishop on f6. Very unpleasant position, surely. Engine's coming up with e5 of all moves. If we take here, there's queen d3 check, a little cheapo on h7. Maybe that explains some of the computer's earlier ideas of just moving the king. And sometimes this king on h7 is prone to e5 and queen d3 check. But in this position, blacks can guard d3 with knight e5. And still okay, it's still very nice. So knight e4. Attacking the queen. cb4. The attack still is strong here, surely. Take here. Queen c3. Let's get to this position. Knight c4. We can crash through now with rook takes b3. What's going on here? What's attacking the queen? So knight takes is out of the question. Crashing through. So it just looks all good. It looks like okay, black needs to be careful with a few cheapos that white might have at his disposal. With the king on h7, it might be in some lines a tactical liability. But yeah, it looks to be overall a very dangerous position. So we go back to this bishop g5 being played by Michael Adams here. And we see in this position bishop e5 from Kasparov and the g file opening up. And the king slightly exposed again, potentially. Okay, now knight b3 may have not helped white's king safety at all. Is the bishop useful to have moved to e5 here? Maybe just moving back now creates some interesting options. What is white actually threatening here? h6, g6, what would be the idea? f4 to try and trap the bishop almost? Not really sure what the white threat is here. Black apparently has knight c6, for example. This is good now. If knight d1, again we can crudely line up on b2. It's all great fun to play this position. Loads of piece play against white's king as a sitting target. Queen e5, threatening surely knight b3 at some point. Knight b3 and queen a1, king c2, bishop a4 is the idea. So this b3 square is as dangerous as it looks in this position. Okay, so white's hanging on a thread here, and knight b3, I guess we're going to see a big evaluation shift for what's playing this knight b3. Yes, this is where it becomes clear, very clear, that knight takes c2 is a crushing blow, it seems. White plays knight takes c5, what else? Isn't one of those b3, hard to suggest anything else. Check. Even queen c5 is strong here. Queen takes c5 is strong. If takes here with the king, rook takes b2 check. This looks crushing from an engine point of view. Rook c8. How does white defend? c3. check here. This looks gruesome. Bishop takes c3. Even this continuation looks absolutely crushing. It's all gone, but we see an even more brilliant continuation. Check on a3. Then the queen just taking on c5 here. It's horrible. Knight a4 is virtually the only move here. What is black actually threatening now? Knight c4 is a big threat. So knight a4, and we see this crushing blow, knight c2, the most accurate move Kasparov plays in the position knight c2 at this depth. Forget about moving the queen, even though that might give an advantage as well. Queen c2, he just plays knight c2. It's all over. It's horrible. King b1, we see another accurate blow. Queen a3. Pressing rook b2. And here, white resigned in the game. So if he had continued, if he had taken that, then it's all falling apart. Even though black is temporarily pieced down, this is the full glare of these rooks down the B and C files is impressive. It's all falling apart here. So, for example, Queen d2, just taking the time to take on a4 creates that threat again on b2, removing that defender. b2, it's just horrible. So this game might inspire many to take up the Sicilian defense. It certainly looks a lot more dynamic sometimes than the French defense. These sort of games, I think this is a dream Sicilian defense game, and it was Kasparov's last win of his professional career in the Wimbledon of tennis, the great Linares series, which Kasparov so dominated. I hope you enjoyed it. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.